I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds and welcome to my horror house. After the last video for The Innocents, as promised, another film directed by Clayton. This one sitting in a weird period for Walt Disney Productions, a sort of cult outlier time I tend to think of as dark Disney, still reeling, I think, from the death of Walt in 1966 and his son Roy Disney in 1971. Eventually, Ron Miller, Walt's son-in-law, became president of Walt Disney Productions, and he was very keen to shake things up, especially after films like Jaws and a little proposition that Disney, and I think pretty much everyone else, passed on, Star Wars. Ron felt that Disney had boxed itself into a formula that wasn't affording it the sort of creative muscle that could get at some of these blockbuster figures. And this strange period of flux gave us films like The Black Hole, The Watcher in the Woods, the amazing Dragon Slayer, Return to Oz, and the film we're going to be talking about today, Something Wicked, This Way Comes. The story comes from Ray Bradbury adapting his own novel of the same name. It's set in Greentown, Illinois, and deals with a nostalgic kind of Americana that is going to be instantly familiar to anyone who has even a passing knowledge of the original Twilight Zone and the work of Stephen King. We follow two boys sort of on the cusp of puberty, really, Will Halloway and Jim Nightshade. They're already dealing with the concerns about beginning to grow up, and perhaps that their relationship is already starting to pull apart. They have urges taking them in different directions when the autumn carnival comes to town, Mr. Dark's Pandemonium Carnival. There's a supporting cast of adult townsfolk who reveal their melancholy regrets, things lost from their youth or things that they wanted to achieve but were never able to. And Mr. Dark's mirror maze shows them what was lost or what could have been, but at a price. A couple of the characters remark on how strange it is for a carnival to come to town in the autumn. It's very clearly set in October, and this tone of regretful longing, the passing of youth, this sort of melancholy mixed with nostalgia, it gives the whole affair a really autumnal feel. I would suggest that this would maybe be a great first movie to put on for a Halloween movie marathon. Now, the roots of this kind of tone are set firmly and deeply in Rod Serling's Twilight Zone. He had a few different arrows in his quiver, and one of the furrows he liked to plough were the stories that I think deal with second chances, washed up adults who get another shot at their dream or achieving their goals, and Something Wicked This Way Comes springs very fruitfully from this soil. And fair to say, moving out beyond this story, without something like Something Wicked This Way Comes, you're really not having the Stephen King that we know and love. There'd be no it, there'd be no Needful Things. Stephen King loves this kind of wistful nostalgia for an America past, perhaps an America that never even really existed, that is absolutely front and centre here. Speaking as a Brit and our phenomenal comedy troupe, The League of Gentlemen, and their superb horror comedy TV series. Without this story, we would never have Papa Lazarou and his Pandemonium Carnival, named directly after Bradbury's creation. You can see echoes of Something Wicked in the latest Nickelodeon series of Are You Afraid of the Dark, in series 3 of the superb Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Perhaps even there'd be no Carnival, cut short way before its time, that superb TV series for HBO, without Something Wicked This Way Comes. And I will say this, at the start of the movie, when all the characters are being introduced and the setting is being established, it may feel a little too cloyingly saccharine, a little too Norman Rockwell for your tastes, but I will say this to you, just wait, hang on in there until the circus comes to town. We need to talk about Mr. Dark, the guy who runs the circus, the big cheese, the head honcho, the guy with the moving tattoos, the very epitome of Mephistophelian. I believe Bradbury wanted Christopher Lee, and while that would have been spectacular, the budget meant that they had to cast someone who at the time was relatively unknown, and we lucked out because a young Jonathan Pryce was cast as Mr. Dark, and let me tell you, his Mr. Dark is suave, sexy, menacing. He is quite possibly one of the greatest devil figures I've ever seen in movies. He is without a doubt Disney's most unsung and underrated villain of all time. Mr. Dark truly is a Hall of Fame villain. When he sets his sights on these two boys who have seen too much after hours, the first night the carnival comes to town, and sets himself in opposition with Will's father, who works at the local library, and that veneer drops, we have one of my favourite villains of all time looking for two boys, and he has the tattoos of Will and Jim on the palm of his hands, and then we get a fantastic confrontation between Mr. Dark and Will's father in the library. This scene is worth the price of admission alone. Going through the library records, Will's father has found that this carnival comes to town once every generation. Does this sound familiar, It fans? And after its passing, some of the townsfolk disappear, succumb to madness and the like. And now Mr. Dark is after his son and his son's best friend, and he offers him a deal, the thing he wants the most. You see, Will's father is a man of advancing years. He had his son late in life, and it's a concern of his that he's too old for Will. He has a heart condition. He can't do any of the things that the father of a young boy needs, and Mr. Dark offers him the proposition of returning his youth to him. And he has a book in his hand, and with every page he rips out of the book, it's another year he has lost. I can return you to 30, no, 31, 32, 33. That scene alone is so good, so menacing. Jonathan Pryce is so perfectly evil and devilish that even if you dislike all the rest of the movie and it's got some loose threads and it's a bit of a patchwork, that scene alone is absolutely worth your time. Mr. Dark's own description of who these carny folk, seemingly eternally young, returning once a generation, actually are is just chillingly wonderful. We are the hungry ones. We butter our plain bread with delicious pain. Who is Mr. Dark if not the great uncle of Pennywise the dancing clown? Who is this band of travelling, seemingly immortals who feed off the negative energy of humans, if not Stephen King's True Knot from Dr. Sleep? And the small band of carny folk, Mr. Dark himself, the Dust Witch, played by Pam Grier, Mr. Cougar, they all have the same kind of flavour that you find in Clive Barker's casts of characters in things like Weave World in Magica and The Nightbreed of Cabal. And there's some chilling stuff in here, aside from the library scene. The carnival parade into town, which is really a search for the boys. The spider attack. Will seeing himself in a guillotine and having his head chopped off. Like an awful lot of these strange fruits from this weird period in Disney's history, this film was a victim of reshoots and re-editing, and you can tell there are a couple of key scenes, the spider attack scene and the mirror maze at the end of the movie, where the boys have clearly grown a year, and one of them, at least the kid playing Will, is now wearing a really dodgy looking wig. There's no hiding the fact that in a year these boys have shot right up. And who knows what Jack Clayton's original intention, probably a lot more subtle, would have been like. But the movie we have now, as cliched as a lot of it seems, only because it's been such a fertile ground for others to magpie from, as patchwork as it is, and as clear as some of the reshoots are, the tone throughout is steadily autumnal, growingly menacing, an all-time great villain, a phenomenal performance by Jonathan Pryce, and just enough of the creeps and the chills that I would suggest that Something Wicked This Way Comes is maybe a superb entry-level movie, just nasty enough to test the waters for young ones who might be making sounds about wanting to watch some scary movies. A lot of the ideas are darker than some of the things that actually happen. I'd be more than happy to look at other movies from this sort of strangely dark period of Walt Disney Productions. Something Wicked This Way Comes is the one that leans most into horror, I'd say. That and perhaps The Watcher in the Woods. But if you want me to look at things like Return to Oz, Dragon Slayer, even The Black Hole, I'd be more than happy to do so. Just let me know in the comments below, or if you want me to lean back into more full-bore horror, make your voice heard.